Let's take our Bibles this morning. Let's go to the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers, chapter number 13. The book of Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And over the last few weeks, we looked at the story surrounding the life of Moses, and we really focused a lot on the Exodus of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage and how God called Moses and used him to lead the Jews out of that bondage, and it was a great story. Spent 3 weeks on it, and there's a lot more to the life of Moses, really. It's recorded throughout the rest of the book of Exodus itself, the book of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We're not going to be looking at all those stories. We could spend a lot of time in picking apart each one, and there's a lot of great illustrations you can find within them. I'm just in this series trying to hit the more well-known stories, or the ones that hold a lot of significance. And today we're going to stop at one here that happens in the book of Numbers, as it's really a defining moment for this generation that saw the works of God in Egypt, but they still really had a hard time believing God. They saw great things that God did, but they still had a hard time believing God and everything God wanted to do for them and through them. And in the end, it actually ended up costing them. It cost them severely. A whole generation lost some of the greatest blessings they could have ever had because they just could not believe God. And it wasn't like God was asking them to do something that He wasn't already shown His credibility for, but they just couldn't do it. Here in Numbers 13, we'll pick it up in verse 1. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. And Moses, by the commandment of God of the Lord, sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were heads of the children of Israel." Now we'll skip down to verse 17. I don't want to slaughter a bunch of names here this morning. We'll go to verse 17. "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. Be ye of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. "So they went up and searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, as the men come to Hamath. And they ascended by the south, and came unto Hebron, where Ahaman and Sheshai and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff, and they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook Eshcol, because the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence, and they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. Today and next time, we are going to be looking at what happens when God's people, despite what God's done for them, hold back and dishonor God by not obeying Him and exercising faith that He is trying to get them to exercise. And today we'll begin to see how things play out as we discuss a story of great loss. Let's pray first. Father, we thank You for the work that You've done in our lives this week. And I do pray as we open this passage here today, it's a sad one, but one that we can certainly learn from. And Lord, help us to learn from it so that we may honor You. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. A story of great loss. It's a very sad situation. It's a disappointing story because God desires to bless His people. There's no doubt in my mind that God desires to bless and use every single one of His people to the most capacity possible. There's no doubt in my mind about that. God really doesn't waste anybody's life. He doesn't just bring people into existence to throw them away. He uses people, and He desires to bring glory for Himself through His people. He wants to make us fruitful people. John 15:8, Jesus said, "Where is my Father glorified? That ye bear much fruit, so shall ye be my disciples." God is glorified when we as God's people are fruitful. We are producing good fruit for His glory and honor. Now, God, in order to see that take place, will lead us to places in life in which He can do that, in which our lives can be fruitful. But sometimes those places He leads requires us to really trust Him to make things happen. That it's not going to just be a cakewalk. It's going to be something that's going to require the movement and the power of God to make possible. And that's not always comfortable, but that's the way that God begins to work. Psalm 37 verses 4 and 5, the Bible says, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart." But the second part of that, verse 5, "Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in Him, and He shall bring it to pass." Talks about waiting, talks about committing our lives to God, talks about being obedient when we don't understand, doing the right thing when everyone else does what's wrong, being the person God wants us to be, and allowing Him to guide the steps each and every way through life. And often God will lead us into things that require Him alone to make it possible, for Him to provide and Him to produce the fruit. And that puts us in a place often of discomfort, doesn't it? Because we don't, as people, like to be in control. We're all a little bit of a control freak. We got to keep things in control. We got to have a grip on things. We got to be able to dictate things and manipulate things and do whatever it takes so that we have power, we have control. But guess what? There are those times where God's going to put your back against the wall, and the only control that you have is what He gives you through Him. And sometimes God puts you in those positions. He gives you a dream, gives you a vision, and says, "All right," and you're like, "How can I do that? How can that ever come to pass?" God says, "It can through me. It can through me." But that puts us in a place of total weakness, of total dependency upon Him. We don't always like being in that place, do we? We don't like feeling weak and helpless. We want to feel strong, but God tells us in His Word so many times that we're strongest when we're weakest. It's a paradox, but it's truth. Again, we want to feel like we can do it, we can handle it. But God wants us to depend on Him to do it, as we obediently follow the things that we're supposed to do. Sometimes God's not doing some things in our life, not changing circumstances, because we're not just simply being obedient on basic things, the basics of the Christian life. There are things that God requires of us, and then there's things that only God can do. If we're not doing what's required of us, God's not going to do the things that He can do, that He wants to do, and that He can do. And if we don't change that mindset, again, it results in Christians depending upon themselves for everything. If they can't do it, they can't figure it out, if they don't have the resources, just frankly, they just won't do it. Just not going to do it. That's crazy, that's ridiculous, and so forth. Why would anybody do that? As a result, they don't exercise faith. Hebrews 11:6. "But without faith it is impossible to please Him, for he that cometh to God must believe that He is, that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." Everything that we do for God is going to require at least an ounce of faith. Everything you step out to do is going to require that you trust God to work out the details, that you trust God to work through the situations, that you trust God to make everything come to pass, and to overcome the obstacles and the difficulties, and to see you through. And you need that kind of faith to survive the Christian race. If we don't have that kind of faith, we'll fall out. Because we'll rely on what we can do, and what we can control, and what we can finance, and what we can manipulate. And at some point, you come at the end of yourself. And sometimes the best thing that ever happens to us is when we come to the end of ourselves and realize, God, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. When faith is not exercised, God is not pleased. Hebrews 10:38. "Now the just shall live by faith. If any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him." My soul shall have no pleasure in Him. Just by our steps of obedience, we are showing faith. If we can't even be obedient in the simple things, we are drawing back and saying, I'm relying on my old resources, I'm relying on my manipulation, I'm relying on my anger to resolve the situation, I'm relying on my finances, I'm relying on, you can fill in the gap. Whatever you're relying on other than God to handle it, God is not pleased. And God's not going to answer the prayer until we step out by faith What's happening when we don't live by faith is we limit God and choke off His best for us. Because His glory isn't propagated. And simply, it just makes God look bad. You know, Christianity itself, I was mentioning this at the 9:30 hour, is supposed to be the dominating way of life. It is superior to all ways. That's what we believe. We believe the book is real. That's why we come to church. That's why we worship this God that the Bible reveals. But if it's not functional, it's not propagated because we're not living by faith and obeying God by faith and doing those things God wants us by faith, we don't have a superior lifestyle. We have a lifestyle that's just the same out there. That we're trying to tell people, oh, hey, come in here because we know better. And it's not better in our lives. Give me a break. We have nothing to propagate because we're not living by faith. We're not trusting God in those areas of obedience we're supposed to do and so forth. Whether it's the revealed will of God or those things that God has led us to do through our time with Him. You know what? We've got to show this world that we've got something that's real. If we don't show this world that we've got something that is real, they go looking elsewhere. And we lose them. We lose them. Look, we don't want God to look bad. Right? We don't want God to look bad. Because we don't believe Him to do things for us, and we don't believe Him enough to obey Him, those very basic areas that we know better in. We don't want God to look bad. For God to work, He must get all the glory. Because when He gets the glory, people are drawn to Him. And that's the whole point. We want people to be drawn to God. We want people to see Him who He is, because He's a great God. He's not that boring God that they maybe grew up with. He's not that hip-hop hipster God that they see in other places. He's not this rugged ogre God that other people believe. He's a great God who does great things for His people, and He cares about them. He's interested in every aspect of their lives, and He's interested in using them. He doesn't throw anybody away. That's the God we want people to know. And when He gets glory through our obedience and faith, and those steps of faith we're supposed to take, He does draw people to Himself. When we think it's all dependent upon us, we get the glory, and people are drawn to us, and guess what? We're not very good at being God. We're not good at being God at all. People find out real quick that we're not God. It doesn't take a whole lot for that to happen. The story here in our text is quite tragic, as it unfolds in two chapters, chapter 13 and chapter 14. It's quite tragic because it affects a whole generation. A whole generation lost, who could have been part of so much, yet their names go down in infamy. And they didn't have an excuse. They didn't have an excuse at all. You know, we could be part of much as well, but sometimes our own lack of faith tragically costs us opportunities and blessings that will resonate throughout our lives. Yeah, you have any regrets spiritually? I do. I mean, there's times I should have done this, or why did I hold back on that? And they affect you, and they do affect eternity as well. Today we're going to learn from the grave mistake by the Israelites. So simply, we just don't make the same. That we just don't make the same mistakes. God put these things in here, both good examples and bad, for our learning, that we might know that He does, how His hand works in human life, and how we as people can sometimes cut our own spiritual throats by not just taking those steps of faith we're supposed to. First off, let's look at the leaders. Now, chapter 13 opens up with God telling Moses to send representatives who were leaders in each tribe over to the land to spy it out. They were to give an intelligence report. They were to do some reconnaissance and check things out and bring a report back. And God makes sure to list each name here too. Verses 4 through 15, again, I won't read it for the sake of time here today, but there's 12 names listed here of leaders, people who were well respected in their tribes. And they were chosen out for this very special job. And the question that we might ask ourselves is, why did God choose these men? Well, again, because they would be major influencers in the lives of the tribes they represented. They were leaders. And a leader is somebody who has influence in the life our lives of other people. That's a leader. A leader has influence. They can sway people with the things that they do and what they say. And because of their position, again, their opinion would hold much sway. They'd go into that land, come back, and the whole hope was that they would come back to encourage and inspire those to, hey, let's go forward. And let's see what God would do. And I believe God sent these men with the hopes that these men would come back with that attitude. They'd have a sense of reality, come up and understand what they're facing, but also encourage the people that God would be able to help them, just like He did in Egypt. Just like He did in Egypt. It wasn't that long ago the events of Egypt took place. I believe it was somewhere around the vicinity of 11 to 13 months, somewhere in there. From the time they left Egypt to this situation right here. And God wanted to see these leaders use their influence in a positive way, in a way that inspired the people. That they could go back, they could go into the land, they get to see, they get a vision, if you will. Their eyes would see and behold what God was going to give them if they went forward. Whether we as people realize it or not, we all hold certain levels of influence in the lives of others. Romans 14 verse 7 says, "For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself." It's been said, no man is an island. Every life, in fact, impacts another life, whether we realize it or not. Some people have more influence than others, but we all have a little bit. And the decisions we make, whether we realize it or not, do impact others. They really do. We can impact others through some bad decisions and discourage others. But thus, we don't want to do that. And we can make some good decisions and inspire others. That's what we want to do. And it's especially true if you're a leader. Whether you have a named position or not. Whether you have a title or not. Some of you hold titles here at your jobs. You are a leader in so many words. Or maybe in the military. Or maybe in ministry. Whatever aspect you're in. You have a position where you're overseeing people and you influence people. Thus we need to be the right kind of leader. If we have that position of leadership, God has given that to us to influence others for the purposes of God. For His glory. And we are to provoke, if you will, in a good way, others to do right, to live for God, and encourage them in that purpose. You know, Paul was writing to a church in Corinth. He mentions in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, he's talking about an offering that was taken up, and that was going to be given, and he was using the Corinth church as an example of others of being fervent and diligent and on time and excited about that, so that they would encourage other churches to do the same, to take up this offering. 2 Corinthians 9:2 says, "For I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia, or Corinth," that's what he's referring to, "was ready a year ago, and your zeal hath provoked very many." They were, whether or not they realized it, Paul was using them as a leader to encourage and provoke others through their zeal for this offering that was going to make a difference for God, of course. Paul's ministry was oftentimes encouraging and inspiring and leading. Sometimes he had to rebuke, but he was doing everything he could, according to Acts 18:23, to strengthen disciples. It says, "And after he had spent some time there, he," this is Paul, "departed and went over all the country of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples." He was strengthening them. He was correcting things. He was inspiring people. He was just trying to keep people with the mindset of what God was trying to do and could do through them. And leaders are supposed to be able to see the big picture like Paul did. Paul saw the big picture as the propagation of Christ and how it would transform lives and change the then known world that they were ministering in. Leaders are supposed to be able to see the big picture, not get so caught up and drugged down by the little nuances and things that get caught up. You know, if God gives you a position of leadership, it's because He's entrusted you with the fact that He's trying to show you a bigger picture. It doesn't matter who you are. God's trying to show you a bigger picture, that there's bigger things and that there's bigger opportunities to be involved with. They get sidetracked with all the puny little things and little tussles that you get caught up with that pull you down and pull everyone that you influence down with them. Leaders are supposed to see the big picture because God reveals to the leader first the big picture. Why? Because through the leader, he influences. Because the leader has influence in the life of a person. And God sent these men over to get a vision. To get a vision of what could be. What could be if they simply obeyed the Lord. If they simply just stepped down and did what God was doing for them, or wanted to do. And he was trying to get them to see. The Bible says, "My eye affected my heart." He wanted these leaders to see and to get an understanding, and to taste and touch and feel the promised land, so that they would have a heart and a burden to communicate it out to everyone that they influenced. That was God's goal. And by the way, if you're a leader, that's what God's going to try to do with you too. But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen at all. Secondly, let's look at the land itself. Now the 12 spies were to conduct a reconnaissance mission which led them through various parts of the promised land. Verse 21, again it says, "So they went up and searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, as men come to Hamath. And they ascended by the south and came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, the Sheshi, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt, and they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff, and they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook of Eshcol, because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence, and they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. So they went up and down, and there's different debates on how far they went. But based on what I see here, what I understand, is really what would be kind of the southern part. They may have went further north. I don't think anybody really knows for sure, but they got a good taste of what was to come. And they spent 40 days up and down. And they were to come back even with a sampling of the fruits, which they did. Verse 24 again, it says they brought the cluster of grapes that they had to haul on two staffs between two guys. I mean, there's a huge cluster of grapes. A lot bigger than the ones you get at Cub or Costco or any of those places you show up. You get the little cluster. No, it was a big old cluster like this. The two men had to carry. Of course, they brought the pomegranates, and there's a lot of symbolism of the pomegranate about fruitfulness and things like that, and figs. And they brought all this stuff back. I believe it was to serve as a visual aid for the leaders to inspire the people. So look at what we found. Did you ever see this in Egypt? No, we ate leeks and onions and garlic. You know, that's what we had to eat. No, I want the grapes. Pomegranate's really good too if you ever had that. Some good stuff. And as they went through the land, they certainly had the opportunity to see the great potential. The great potential that land held. And God will often reveal the potential of an opportunity He is presenting us and leading us to do. We call it a vision, if you will. A vision. You know, Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 16, verses 8 and 9, he says, "For I will tarry at Ephesus unto Pentecost, for a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries." More about the second part of the minute, but I want to focus on, for a great door and effectual is opened unto me there at Ephesus. Paul saw a great opportunity in Ephesus. He had gotten a vision from God, and God was opening up some very unique doors. And God will often do that, show you some potential and what could be, and what He'd like to do. And sometimes it's overwhelming. You know, these doors don't always open, but when they do, they are to be embraced with faith that God is looking to use us. Now, I keep thinking about Mongolia, and I think we've got probably 13, 14, 15 people signed up to go. And this week we're going to have the opportunity to go to New York City and meet the president of Mongolia. Imagine that. But I remember when it was presented before me, and I didn't know anything about the country and any of the things that have gone on, but prayed about it and asked the Lord we should get involved in it. And the Lord seemed to indicate this, and as I've learned more, I'm like, wow, I can't believe God has given us this opportunity to make an impact in the lives of people that for many years Mongolia was a closed country. Today it's opening up, and thanks a lot to this current president. There's a long story with him. It's quite amazing. And I think about our building and what God's doing in that. And, we prayed and we sacrificed and we saved and we kept fighting, and now God's given us a new opportunity with that building. There's lots of I've been dreaming for years of what we could do if we didn't have to rent a facility on an hourly basis. But now God's starting to bring some of that to pass. And we go forward by faith, if you will. We embrace with faith and do what He wants to do to propagate His glory. That's how it works. The promised land itself is a picture of abundant Christian living, as one lives by faith, because they would require faith to conquer. The whole book of Joshua is about, it's more than just about wars that take place. It's about being a victorious Christian and winning battles for the glory of God in your own personal life, and of course through the propagation of the gospel in these days. But people have to cross Jordan for that to take place. A picture of stepping out by faith. And every life can experience the promised land, if you will. It's symbolic that way. The promised land, again, is what God has for us personally. If we're obedient to Him and take the steps of faith He leads us to take. Yet with every open door, with every great opportunity, there are challenges that exist. 1 Corinthians 16:9, again it says, "For a great door and effectual is open to me, and there are many adversaries." So there's challenges ahead. There's challenges ahead. There's difficulties. There's going to be obstacles. And in our story, there were challenges that existed, namely these giants mentioned in verse 22. They lived in Hebron, which was an ancient city. It mentions that it was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And Zoan was a great city. It was at one point the capital city. And it was just communicating the significance of Hebron, that it was an ancient stronghold that's been here for quite some time. And these giants live in there. Giants are symbolic of the difficulties and the obstacles we face that seem to be overwhelming. And then, of course, in verse 28, the walled cities. Nevertheless, the people be strong and dwell in the land, and the cities are walled. They were surrounded. There was no getting in or getting out very easily. Obstacles, strongholds, if you will. Yes, great opportunities and potential exist, but the challenges to see that potential become reality were also a little overwhelming. And they realized they couldn't do this alone. But nor were they supposed to either. And with every great opportunity, there are great challenges that need to be overcome. It's just the way it works. And it's designed that way so that we look to God for help. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. Now unto Him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. God can do more than we can ever begin to conjure up in our own mind. And when God leads us to places where the obstacles are bigger and higher than our heads, it's because He's trying to show us what He can exceedingly abundantly do. But that's going to require us to say, okay, throw reason a little bit to the wind here and go forward. These guys, it requires some steps of faith and belief what God could do. And with us too, as individuals and as a church, we're going to have to face those same decisions. Has God been leading you to do something that seems to be filled with great potential of blessing, but challenges seem overwhelming? How could I ever afford that to go there? Or how could I ever take off work to do that? Or how can my boss ever, understand what I'm trying to do so I can get that time off? Or how could I ever take on that new ministry? Or how could I ever be part of that? Or whatever it is. Has God been trying to get you to do something, but you just haven't done it yet? And you just keep looking at it, well, there's just too many giants. There's just too many giants. Well, that's what the spies were faced with. They took a look, they saw the potential, they saw the opposition. Now they're going to bring, thirdly, what I call the lowdown. The lowdown. What's the report? Upon returning from their mission, the spies brought before the congregation, or they were brought before this congregation to speak of the things they experienced in Canaan. Verse 26. They went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. They were brought before this congregation, and they were going to get a chance to speak up. They had a decision to make here. How are we going to communicate? Were we going to communicate faith or faithlessness, in so many words? Now they mentioned the great blessings that appeared to be there. Of course, they brought back the fruit. Verse 27 says, and they told him and said, we came unto the land whither thou sendest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey. And this is the fruit of it. In other words, there's some good things here. Milk and honey, abundance, nice land, great place for our future generations to settle in. And then they express the challenges. Verse 28. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities were walled very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there, the giants. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. So they didn't hide the fact that there were challenges. They did express them. I think that was good of them to at least tell, hey, look, it's great things are there, but we certainly do have some challenges. Based on what they saw, it was a decision point for them. How are they going to, as leaders, influence people? What are they going to say? Based on what they saw and what they believed about God, would they encourage going forward, or would they encourage for going? Well, verse 30, we see one leader stand up. Caleb from the tribe of Judah. Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. There's a man of faith. Caleb remembered all that God had done for him and for the nation. He had within his heart an understanding of what God wanted to do. And those giants and those walled cities and the Hittites and the Amalekites and the Amorites, they were bred according to Caleb. They were possible to overcome because he knew they had the God of heaven behind them. Caleb has some faith because he saw God bigger than the giants, and he said, let's go. Let's go. Let's go forward. Well, there were 10 others that didn't quite feel that way. Verse 31, but the men that went up with them said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. These 10 didn't see God bigger than the giants. They saw only what they could do themselves and estimated it wasn't sufficient, and it certainly wasn't sufficient. But they had forgotten all that God had done for them not that long ago. And they held back. And to seal the deal, instead of influencing steps of faith, they influenced a default back to Egypt. Verse 32, and they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. Could you imagine the way they bloated what they said? And there we saw the giants the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. I mean, it's just pathetic. It was just empty faith. These 10 didn't see God bigger than the giants. They just saw their own, what they had going for them, so to say, and realized it wasn't sufficient, so there was no reason of even attempting. They brought this evil report to dissuade the people from even trying. Instead of catching God's vision and plans for Israel and using their influence to encourage others, they did the exact opposite. They influenced them in a way away from God. Chapter 14, verse 4, we'll hit more on this next week, but notice their attitude. Or let's start in verse 2. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us up into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return unto Egypt? And they said one to another, Let us make a captain, and let us return unto Egypt. It's like, hello, what, you forget something here? You forget about those taskmasters that you were crying to God about all those years? You forget about that Nile that was turned to blood? Did you forget about the locusts? You forget about the death of the firstborn? Did you forget about the Red Sea? Yeah. And we look at these people, oh yeah, they're faithless. But you know what? We do the same thing. We do the same thing sometimes. Sometimes God's trying to get us to move forward and obey. Oh, what to God it was like it was when I was single. Oh, what to God it was like it was when I was unsaved. You know, I got saved and everything's just not going right now, and it's like, we're like them. God's brought me to this place right now just to kill me and destroy my life and make a waste of it. God doesn't care anymore. I want to go back to Egypt. I want to go back to the world. You know what? Many do. Many do. They go right back to the world. Oh, this Christianity doesn't work anymore. And it's like, hello, we can criticize them, but what about us? What about us? We do the same thing sometimes. Because the giants just look a little too big. We just don't think God has our best interest in mind. We just don't think God has our best interest in mind. And God's drugged us here to do, I guess He drugged us here just to slay us. No, He's never drugged us anywhere to slay us. He's brought us places to use us. To use us. And sometimes we get this attitude, what did God would go back to Egypt? And we forget. Sometimes we've got a short memory. These leaders, instead of catching God's vision and plans for Israel and using their influence to encourage others, they did the exact opposite. They made God appear to others as completely insufficient and weak in overcoming the obstacles that were there. This was bad. This is real bad. This is rough. This is a bad choice. They made a real bad decision. But sadly, there will always be people like this who can only see limitations and obstacles, and they always appear bigger than God. They always appear like God just can't overcome. And their faith is fickle and it's fruitless. Can't go anywhere. Stays in park. Sits there spiritually, doing nothing. And they never want to attempt anything for God, and they don't want anybody else to do it either. They don't want anybody else to do it either. Because misery loves company. Misery loves company. I don't know if you're familiar with the name William Carey. William Carey was an Englishman. He was a cobbler. He fixed and made shoes. One day he took some old leather. He made a globe. He was a born-again Christian, and he began to pray over that globe. And as he prayed, he began to weep over the lost that were around the globe. Of course, at that time, Britain, the British Empire had expanded and was continuing to expand into other lands. And he got a real burden about people in other lands that don't have the gospel like he did. He had the opportunity to speak before a preacher's meeting of all things, and he talked about his burden and the necessity of reaching out to these foreign places and bringing the gospel to them and so forth. And he's basically told to sit down and shut up by much callous. God's going to win the heathen. It's not going to be because of you or anybody else. Just be quiet. I'm glad he didn't listen. Because he instead went to India. And he took on the obstacles. And he had some obstacles. Let me tell you something. It took a long time for him to make some headway. He translated the scriptures only to have them and his printing press burned to the ground, and he had to start all over again. I believe he had lost his first wife. I mean, he just went through some difficulties. But by the time it was all said and done, 34 different languages had at least a part of God's word in their mother tongue. He's known today as the father of modern missions, because he saw what God could do, even though others did not. He made a statement that I think is real powerful. He said, expect great things from God and attempt great things from God. That's great. Are you attempting any great things for God in your personal life? What was the greatest thing you've attempted for God recently? Not for something for us to brag about, but what is the greatest step of faith you've actually taken in your Christian life? Well, I did something 10 years ago. Well, that's great 10 years ago, but what about now, today? We are to expect great things from God in an expectation we attempt them. And that's what God was trying to get these Israelites to do. You know, there's greater things that I can do, that I can propagate my glory, and I can propagate my honor, and people, and your life can have the abundant blessing that God wants, but there's this, but sometimes you get those negos. They'll do everything you can to pull you back. And sometimes they're successful, as they are in this story. And we'll pick that up next time. Because we'll see a story of great loss, what it cost them. A whole generation lost an opportunity, and they came to regret it. May we learn from this, and we'll learn more, like I said, next time. So that we embrace the opportunities that we have. To see God use us in ways we never thought possible. Amen. Let's stand to our feet.